One of the most contentious topics in the health and fitness world is what is the perfect diet from a longevity point of view. Every day, someone comes out with a conflicting opinion. One demographic is purely carnivore, saying vegetables are bad because they contain lectins, oxalates, and other chemicals.
I don't believe that vegetables are fundamentally healthy for humans.
Some say that any food with the slightest amount of seed oil is completely toxic for you and you should avoid it at all costs.
When you see oils like sunflower, safflower, grapeseed, and canola oil, run, Forrest, run, because these are highly processed oils. Refined with so much heat and so much pressure, they contain free radicals and they're incredibly inflammatory.
Then the other group will proceed to destroy any non-seed oils, which are usually filled with saturated fat or butter that causes heart disease.
The fat in it is mostly saturated fat that leads to heart disease and is linked to Alzheimer's disease.
Honestly, I give up. For the past couple of years, I have traveled down this rabbit hole of metabolic health and longevity, and for every expert advice or opinion I have listened to, I can show you an equally educated expert who states the complete opposite. But I think this focus on health impacts of certain foods is actually detracting from the fundamental issue at play. If you look at any graph over time, despite our increasing health literacy and access to information, the rates of obesity and all forms of chronic disease appears to be increasing substantially. Likewise with diabetes and metabolic syndrome, and you will note that this appears to correlate with weight. Let's try and dissect this issue from a first principles point of view. Now, I hate going down the evolutionary loophole and proposing things from that perspective, but I think we need to ask what was different 200 to 300 years ago that caused people to be far healthier, which isn't happening today. I mean, these people didn't have access to all this information, podcasts, knowledge on micronutrients, and so on. If I had to summarize the difference, it's actually that people had less access to food and had to move around more. As funny as it sounds, this is also the secret to weight loss.
What is the most effective way that people can lose weight, in your experience as a doctor?
Right. One of the things...
Eat less food, do more exercise.
Are you a doctor?
Now that we are in an environment where this threat of scarce energy resources is no longer present, our body accumulates energy in the form of fat because it is adapted to conserving energy for a potential famine in the future. The problem is that fat is an endocrine organ that contributes to metabolic syndrome and increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. Now that we've identified the fundamental issue, it's quite simple. We need to reduce our energy intake and increase our energy output. Every single diet that you've heard of tries to accomplish this through one mechanism or another. For instance, this could involve the restriction of a particular macronutrient, such as carbohydrates in a low-carb diet or fats in a low-fat diet. It could involve restriction of a particular eating window, such as in the case of intermittent fasting, or restriction of a person's friend group, such as in the case of veganism. The problem that happens with all these diets is that people become ideological and they think their method is inherently superior when that's not the case. In all instances, the benefit of the diet is purely due to caloric restriction. Caloric restriction without malnutrition is the most effective non-pharmacological intervention that enhances longevity and health span in numerous non-human species. Evidence showing the positive benefits of caloric restriction in humans has been accumulating, with many clinical studies showing weight loss and an improvement in physiological markers after short and prolonged bouts of caloric restriction. Often when people report the so-called benefits of their mythical, amazing diet, it's usually just because in the study referenced, participants are in a state of caloric restriction. To emphasize this point, I will be referencing a year-long randomized controlled trial, Dietfit, in 2018, which showed that low-fat and low-carb diets produced similar weight loss and improvements in metabolic health markers. Let's go through some figures. What you will see is that in both groups, the net energy intake in terms of calories was relatively similar, and they had roughly similar amounts of protein. One group had significantly lower carbohydrate intake, whereas the other had a significantly lower fat intake. And I will summarize that this study showed no significant weight loss difference between the low carb and low fat groups. Both groups also had a similar improvement in health markers, including BMI, waist circumference, blood pressure, fasting insulin, and glucose levels. The results of this study contribute to a large body of evidence indicating that for weight loss, neither low fat nor low carb is superior if there's no difference in caloric or protein intake. Similarly, for intermittent fasting, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, which aimed to assess if isocaloric intermittent fasting was superior to caloric restriction. In other words, does time-restricted feeding offer any additional metabolic benefit outside of the caloric restriction itself? The answer, to summarize, is no. All the benefits of intermittent fasting are also due to caloric restriction. Mike Israetel, a popular exercise coach, emphasizes this exact point in this video.
It turns out that controlling your calories has pretty much all the health benefits. If you do it by fasting for a long time and then eating, dope. If you do it by eating multiple meals throughout the day that are a little bit smaller than normal, and that's how you control your calories, you get almost the same health benefits.
So where am I going with this? Rather than focusing on specific macronutrients and eating windows, the best diet is the one that can put you in a state of optimal energy balance and protein, which you can stick to. Peter Attia in this video summarizes the exact point I'm trying to make.
Even the quote-unquote best diet, if it's in excess of energy balance, will produce poor metabolic health. So regardless of what you think the best diet is, if you think it's a keto diet or a paleo diet or a low-carb diet or a Mediterranean diet or a vegan diet, take any version of those and consume them to excess to the point where you are no longer in energy balance and you are accumulating adipose tissue that leaks out of the subcutaneous space and gets into the liver, gets into the viscera, you're going to be unhealthy. So again, I always think people are majoring in the minor and minoring in the major on nutrition when they start to fight in dietary tribes on this stuff. Ultimately, it matters most that you can find something that is manageable and sustainable over the long haul. None of this matters if you can, adhere to the perfect diet for 3 months and then you can't. It's better to have a 7 out of 10 diet in terms of quality and perfection that you can sustain indefinitely than a 10 out of 10 diet that you can only sustain for 3 or 6 months.
So how do you find the optimum energy balance for you? There are two relatively useful measurements, noting that everything has limitations and no specific marker of health is perfect. The first would be your weight relative to your height. This is called the body mass index or your BMI. Essentially, you get your weight in kilos and you divide it by your height in meters squared. A healthy range is usually between 18.5 to 25. If you're a female with less muscle, you may prefer to be in the lower end of this range, whereas if you are male, regularly strength train, or are genetically predisposed to carrying a higher amount of muscle mass, such as African Americans in one study, then I would err towards the higher end of this range. The second is the waist measurement, which you would want to be between 40 to 49% of your height. Let's use me as an example and determine what my energy balance should be. I'm around 5'7" or 170 centimeters tall. I've been regularly strength training and I am male, so I go by the relatively higher BMI, which is 25. 25 times 1.7 squared gets me close to the ideal weight, which would be around 72 kilos. Similarly, my waist measurement should be between 68 and 83 centimeters. My current stats are around 75 kilos in weight and a waist measurement of 76 centimeters. So I would benefit from reducing my weight a little bit further. If you are not in any rush, the best thing to do is to determine the ideal amount of calories you should be consuming for your ideal body weight. What you can do for this is go to Google and search up TDEE calculator. So I am male, I'm 25 years old. We've already established that the ideal body weight for me would be around 72 kilos and my height is 170 centimeters and I do a moderate amount of exercise. That makes my maintenance calories around 2,577. If I was to eat these maintenance calories for a long enough period, eventually I would get to this ideal weight. There are far more accelerated approaches for weight loss and I will be making separate videos for those. The next goal should be getting in sufficient protein. The current evidence regarding intakes is in the range of 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. This is in the target for achieving optimum health in humans. So for me, if I am getting 115 grams of protein, that is usually sufficient. To summarize, all I need to focus on then is consuming approximately 2,500 calories per day and getting a minimum of 115 grams of protein and trying not to exceed that caloric intake. Now that I know these numbers, it doesn't really matter how I get there. I personally would recommend having a healthy balance of protein, fat, and carbohydrates with meals throughout the day, although any approach can work. Restricting certain macronutrients doesn't feel appropriate for me, especially given the overwhelming evidence that low-fat diets, for instance, can reduce testosterone levels in men. This makes sense as cholesterol is one of the precursors to testosterone production. Furthermore, my workouts in the gym are just usually better and I get better pumps if carbohydrates are not restricted. Now that we understand this, I think it's important to appreciate that when you eat meals, you want to ensure that you have the least calories, ideally with the highest amount of protein, in the most satisfying and sustainable way possible. Foods that appear healthy may not necessarily hit this criteria, and it's very easy to be trapped by deceptive marketing with certain health foods and social conditioning. Let me give you an example. What do you think is healthier, a KFC burger or a protein cookie? Let's find out.
What do you think has more calories, the KFC burger or the protein cookie?
Gonna say the
KFC burger.
KFC burger.
KFC burger.
KFC burger.
This one? This has more calories?
First burger.
KFC burger.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
100%?
Yeah.
Are you 100% sure?
I'd say so, yeah.
Okay, why do you think that?
Processed, probably an unhealthy burger, I'd say so. Protein cookie, meant to be healthy, I'd
Healthier,
say.
eh?
Yeah.
Alright, so this has the most calories and less protein than this one here. And for a protein cookie, has 16 grams of protein, 50 calories and 25 grams of protein.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you were to choose between the two,
really?
yeah, I know. If you were to choose between the two, what would you go for?
Okay, then go for that.
There you go, sorted.
Go for the more protein, less
Low
calories. Yeah.
Perfect choice, my bro.
Yeah, of course, Steve.
This one? Yeah. Perfect answer, bro. So there you have it. Most people really do think that the KFC burger is the unhealthy option. But in reality, the KFC burger had more protein and less calories than the protein cookie itself.
Obviously, I am not saying to go out and have KFC burgers every day. Please do not misinterpret what I'm saying. But you can actually make chicken burgers at home using chicken breast, good quality seasoning. I like this McCormick seasoning that you can get from Woolies, and I air fry it. Tastes exactly like KFC. And you can get decent macros. This brings me to the topic of if it fits your macros / flexible dieting. We want to make hitting a caloric deficit or even the ideal number of calories for your height / ideal weight with sufficient protein as easy as possible. Ultimately, it's about sticking to the diet.
Everybody gets so fixated on what's the best diet. And I think the literature is just so abundantly clear on this. The best diet is whichever one you can adhere to stay in energy balance.
Yeah, I will co-sign that. That's been my experience too.
If you are ideologically following a certain diet, you are restricting yourselves to the tools that you can use to hit a caloric deficit. In the last month and a half, I've lost approximately 8 kilos eating foods that I enjoy, including burgers, pizzas, pastas, cheesecake, because I was able to stay in a state of energy balanced whilst consuming sufficient protein. I'll probably do a separate video on the diet that I followed in the future. However, if you do like cooking, there's so many options on Instagram and recipes which quite literally provide you with the total calories as well as protein. Especially in the current environment, there really isn't an excuse to not hit your required macronutrients. But here are some methods that you can use to easily reduce your caloric intake. Number 1, reduce high calorie foods. Specifically, I am talking about oil. Please do not add oil to your food. You can use spray on oil or cook your food in an air fryer. Number 2, swap out high calorie foods for lower calorie alternatives. I'll give some examples now. So instead of using peanut butter, you can actually get PB2 protein powder, which tastes very similar to peanut butter. It's essentially peanut butter with the fat removed. Number 2, sugary drinks. You get the sugar-free alternative. Instead of high calorie condiments, you get the low calorie condiments. So with mayonnaise, they always have a low fat version that has a lot less calories but tastes relatively similar. Similarly, instead of normal Greek yogurt, get low fat yogurt, cottage cheese, low fat cottage cheese. And then from a carbohydrate perspective, you can reduce the calories. So instead of adding sugar to your food, just add stevia or any other artificial sweetener. Instead of normal noodles, you can get shirataki noodles and so on. Number 3 is to incorporate lower calorie / filling foods into your diet. So you can bulk up any meal that you have by adding salad to it. You can also increase your fruit and vegetable intake. These 2 options that I've just discussed are especially useful because they also improve the total amount of micronutrients that you are getting, which is very important for health. Whenever you have a protein shake, you can add chia seeds to it. This increases satiety because these chia seeds fill up and expand in the stomach. And you can often, instead of dessert, get sugar-free Jello, 0 calories, but can help with that sweet tooth. Anyway, I will be putting out more videos in the future, including the specific diet that allowed me to lose a decent chunk of weight, so 10 kilos in 6 weeks, so subscribe for that. In the meantime, watch this video on a simple hack that can reduce your risk of death by 60% and help you lose weight at the same time. See you in the next one.